Have you ever wondered what secrets the mountains keep? 20 years ago, 3 young cheerleaders vanished without a trace, leaving nothing behind but their perfectly lined-up shoes at the edge of a forest. The whole town searched, but no one could find them. Families were broken, and hope slowly faded away. Now, a hiker exploring caves has stumbled upon something that will shake this small town to its core. What really happened to those girls? Why did they disappear after their big victory? And what chilling message did they leave behind? Some mysteries aren't meant to stay buried forever. The roar of the crowd in the Pinecrest High School gymnasium reached a fever pitch as 14-year-old Ren Holloway executed a perfect aerial cartwheel. Her best friends, Zara Chen and Marisol Diaz, caught her descent with practiced precision, their blue and gold uniforms shimmering under the fluorescent lights. The Pinecrest Pumas Spirit Squad, regional underdogs from a town most couldn't find on a map, had just delivered the performance of their young lives. And the first-place trophy goes to the Pinecrest Pumas! The announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. Ren's eyes widened in disbelief as she grabbed Zara and Marisol's hands, squeezing until her knuckles turned white. The 3 girls screamed in unison, jumping up and down in a tight circle as their teammates swarmed around them. Ms. Templeton, their coach of 3 years, wiped away tears as she accepted the trophy, her normally stern expression replaced with unrestrained joy. "We did it. We actually did it," Marisol kept repeating, her dark curls bouncing as she danced in place. The smell of hairspray and sweat mingled with the sweetness of victory. "I told you my lucky ribbon would work," Zara said, touching the faded blue ribbon braided into her sleek black ponytail, a gift from her grandmother before they'd left China. "This calls for a celebration," Ren declared, her freckled face flushed with triumph. "Secret spot? Just us 3 before we get on the bus?" The other 2 nodded eagerly. Since 5th grade, the trio had been inseparable, bound by inside jokes and whispered secrets that no one else in Pinecrest could penetrate. "Team, gather up!" Ms. Templeton called, her voice cutting through the celebration. "Bus leaves in 30 minutes. Don't forget to grab all your belongings from the locker room." The arena began to empty as the last competition of the evening concluded. Parents and supporters filed out toward the parking lot, discussing dinner, plans, and savoring unexpected victory. The Pumas huddled for a final team cheer before dispersing to collect their things. "Meet by the old oak behind the east parking lot in 10, Ren whispered to her friends as they separated to gather their bags. 15 minutes later, Ms. Templeton stood beside the yellow school bus, clipboard in hand, meticulously checking off names as each team member boarded. "Ashley? Here, coach. Brianna? Present. Kayla? Right here." The list continued until only 3 names remained unchecked. Ms. Templeton frowned, looking up from her clipboard to scan the dwindling crowd around the bus. "Has anyone seen Ren, Zara, or Marisol?" she asked, checking her watch with increasing agitation. The celebration mood shifted as teammates glanced at each other and shrugged. "They were just here," Brianna offered, twisting the end of her ponytail nervously. Ren said something about taking a victory selfie. Ms. Templeton's expression hardened. "Cassidy, Brooke, check the locker room. Jake, run back inside and see if they're still at the concession stand." She dispatched the team manager and 2 seniors to search while she pulled out her cell phone. As twilight settled over the gymnasium parking lot, the searches yielded nothing. No sign of the 3 girls in the bathroom, the concession stand, or the arena floor where other teams were still packing up equipment. Their gym bags had been collected from the locker room, proof they'd been there, but the girls themselves had vanished. "This isn't like them," Ms. Templeton muttered, dialing Ren's cell phone for the 3rd time. The call went straight to voicemail. By 8:30 p.m., parents had been notified. By 9:15, Sheriff Garrett Reed had arrived with 2 deputies, his weathered face grave as he coordinated an expanded search of the facility and surrounding grounds. "My daughter was with them earlier," he said, his voice tight with professional detachment masking personal concern. "Said they were inseparable, those 3. Volunteers combed the area with flashlights, calling the girls' names into the deepening night. The bus, now empty, remained in the parking lot as parents arrived to collect the rest of the team. Mothers hugged their daughters a little tighter. Fathers scanned the darkness with increased vigilance. At 11:42 p.m., Deputy Wilkins made the discovery that would haunt Pinecrest for decades to come. His flashlight beam caught something white at the forest edge, just beyond the east parking lot, where an ancient oak tree stood sentinel. "Sheriff!" he called, voice cracking. "You need to see this!" Garrett Reed approached slowly, as if prolonging. His steps might somehow change what awaited him. His flashlight joined Deputy Wilkins, illuminating 3 pairs of pristine white cheer shoes, meticulously placed side by side at the forest line. The shoes were perfectly aligned, laces neatly tied, as if their owners had simply stepped out of them and walked away, into thin air, into the darkness, into a mystery that would consume a town for 20 years. In the beam of the flashlights, a blue and gold hair ribbon fluttered from a low branch of the oak tree, waving like a final goodbye in the gentle May breeze. "Sheriff." Garrett Reed reached for the ribbon with a trembling hand, carefully untying it from the branch. His daughter Kimberly had one just like it. All the Pumas did. He slipped it into an evidence bag, his throat tight as he radioed in their finding. "We need floodlights, search dogs, and every available officer," he said, eyes fixed on those 3 pairs of shoes. "And someone call the FBI." By dawn, Pinecrest had transformed. Yellow crime scene tape sectioned off the eastern edge of the forest. Search dogs strained at their leashes, noses to the ground, but kept circling back to the shoes as if confused by a trail that simply ended. News vans lined the main street, reporters speaking in hushed, urgent tones about the cheerleader mystery. In the Holloway home, Wren's father Isaac sat motionless at the kitchen table. A single father since his wife's death from cancer 4 years ago, he'd raised Wren alone, building their life around her cheerleading schedule and science club meetings. She would never run away, he insisted to the detective interviewing him. Never. She has a chemistry test on Monday she's been studying for all week. Isaac's hand curled around Wren's favorite mug, still half full of the hot chocolate she'd made before leaving for the competition. He couldn't bring himself to wash it. Across town in the modest apartment above Chen family alterations, Zara's parents struggled through questioning with their limited English. Mr. Chen kept repeating, "Good girl," while his wife clutched their daughter's acceptance letter to the youth leadership program she'd been excited to attend that summer. No friends trouble, no boy trouble, only school and cheering, Mrs. Chen managed through tears. The interpreter explained that Zara had been their guide to America since arriving 5 years ago, helping them navigate everything from grocery shopping to parent-teacher conferences. In the Diaz household, chaos reigned. Marisol's extended family had descended en masse. Uncles pacing and making phone calls, aunts preparing food no one would eat. Her 4 younger siblings huddled together on the couch. Her mother Carmen sat silently in Marisol's bedroom, smoothing her hand over the carefully made bed. "She's the responsible one," Carmen told Sheriff Reed when he came personally to update them. "She texts me when they stop for gas on field trips. She wouldn't." Her voice broke, and Reed awkwardly patted her shoulder. the gesture inadequate against such grief. Days bled into weeks. The search expanded, then contracted, then expanded again. Volunteers combed every inch of the forest, their numbers dwindling with each passing day. Divers checked the lake 5 miles east. Roadblocks and checkpoints yielded nothing. The FBI brought in specialists and technology, but the case remained the same. 3 girls had vanished without a trace, except for their shoes and that single ribbon. Theories multiplied like weeds. They'd been abducted. They'd run away together. They'd been witnesses to something terrible and were being hidden for their protection. Each scenario played out in anxious whispers at the grocery store, the gas station, the school. By fall, the Pumas competed with 3 empty spots on their squad. Ms. Templeton had offered to step down, but the school board insisted she stay. Continuity for the traumatized remaining girls. She moved through practices like a ghost, flinching whenever anyone performed a stunt that Ren, Zara, or Marisol had excelled at. 1 year after the disappearance, Mayor Franklin unveiled the memorial, 3 stone benches arranged in a triangle on the town green. A small plaque bore their names and the words, "Forever Young, Forever Missed." That night, the town gathered for the first candlelight vigil. The flames reflected in the tearful eyes of a community, branded by loss. Isaac Holloway started drinking that night and rarely stopped. Zara's parents closed their shop and moved to Philadelphia, unable to bear the pitying glances. The Diaz family stayed, Carmen channeling her grief into organizing search parties that grew smaller each year. Sheriff Reed kept their case files on his desk, reviewing them weekly, then monthly, then only on anniversaries. New leads became rare, then non-existent. The FBI officially classified it as a cold case after 5 years, though Reed refused to use that term. On the 5th anniversary, as Reed stood alone at the memorial long after the others had gone home, he noticed a young deputy lingering nearby. "You know what haunts me, Lopez?" he said, gesturing for her to join him. "Those shoes, perfectly placed, like they just stepped out of them and floated away." Deputy Martina Lopez nodded solemnly. "I was in college when it happened. Made me afraid to come home on breaks." "Don't lose the file when I retire," Reed said suddenly. "Someone needs to remember." "I won't forget," she promised, not knowing she'd inherit both his badge and his obsession 15 years later. In the gentle May breeze, 3 small flames flickered on the memorial candles, stubbornly refusing to die out. May 2025, Talia. Reed stood in the doorway of her childhood bedroom, cardboard box balanced on her hip. Dust particles danced in the afternoon sunlight, streaming through the window that still had the same faded blue curtains from her high school days. Her mother had preserved the room like a museum exhibit. Posters of early 2000s bands still taped to the walls, academic trophies lined up on shelves. "It's only temporary," she reminded herself, setting the box down with a thud that seemed to echo her resignation. At 28, returning to Pinecrest wasn't in Talia's life plan. 6 years at the Chicago Tribune, building a respectable portfolio of investigative pieces, only to have it all collapse under budget cuts and digital restructuring. Her severance package had lasted 3 months before reality forced her home. She began unpacking, methodically arranging her laptop, notebooks, and the framed photo of herself accepting a regional journalism award. Last year, she'd been interviewing politicians and exposing corporate corruption. Now she'd be covering town council meetings and writing puff pieces about local businesses for the Pinecrest Gazette. As she pushed her suitcase under the bed, her hand brushed against something. Pulling it out, she found a shoebox labeled "School" stuff in her teenage handwriting. Inside lay relics of her childhood: friendship bracelets, notes passed in class, ticket stubs. At the bottom, folded and yellowed with age, was a newspaper clipping. "Search continues for missing cheerleaders," the headline read, accompanied by 3 school photos. Young girls with bright smiles, unaware their faces would become fixtures in the town's collective memory. Talia had been 8 when it happened. She remembered her mother suddenly insisting on driving her to school instead of letting her walk. Remembered the way adults would fall silent when children entered rooms. Remembered the assembly where they learned about stranger danger and the buddy system. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Getting settled?" her mother asked, leaning against the door frame. "As much as I can," Talia replied, holding up the clipping. "I found this." Her mother's smile faltered. "The 20th anniversary is next week. They're doing a special memorial service." She hesitated. "Your father ran into Martin at the hardware store. He said the Gazette is planning feature coverage." Talia nodded, understanding the unspoken suggestion. Martin Green, owner and editor-in-chief of the Gazette, had been pestering her for years to come work for him. Now that she was back in town, desperate and overqualified, he finally had his chance. The next morning, she found herself in the Gazette's modest office, housed in what used to be a Victorian home on Elm Street. Martin, grayer but still sporting, the same bushy mustache, beamed as he showed her to a small desk. "We don't do much hard news these days," he explained, "but this anniversary piece could be something special. The town needs closure, and you've got the outside perspective we need." "What angle are you thinking?" Talia asked, already mentally drafting outlines. "The impact on the community. How we've moved forward while never forgetting. Sheriff Lopez has agreed to an interview, and we're reaching out to the families." Martin dropped a thick folder on her desk. "Here's our archive on the case." That afternoon, Talia drove to the outskirts of town, where a modest ranch house sat on a well-kept acre. Former Sheriff Garrett Reed, now 74, answered the door after her third knock. His once imposing frame stooped with age. "Sheriff Reed? I'm Talia Reed from the Gazette. We spoke on the phone about the anniversary piece?" Recognition flickered in his eyes. Right. Come in. And it's just Garrett now. Haven't been sheriff for 7 years. The living room was cluttered, but clean, dominated by fishing photographs and a large bookshelf. A woman Talia recognized as Reed's daughter, Kimberly, waved from the kitchen. "Dad, your medication," she reminded him before disappearing down a hallway. "Early stage, dementia," Reed explained matter-of-factly. "Some days are better than others. Today's a good day, so ask your questions." Talia started with standard prompts about his memories of the investigation, his thoughts on the community response. Reed answered mechanically, like he'd repeated these stories hundreds of times. It wasn't until she asked about forensic challenges that something changed in his demeanor. "We never had a crime scene," he said, fingers drumming against his knee. "Just those shoes, perfectly placed. No footprints leading away. It was like what?" Talia prompted when he fell silent. "Like they were lifted straight up," he finished. "Of course, that's impossible. But that's what it looked like." "And the forest search yielded nothing?" Reed's eyes suddenly sharpened, focusing on her with unexpected intensity. "We didn't check the caves thoroughly enough." "Caves?" Talia leaned forward, noticing this detail wasn't in any of the articles. "Up on Black Ridge. Miles of them. Some go deep. We had teams go in, but..." He rubbed his forehead. There was something about the caves. "What about them?" His expression clouded. "I can't. It's fuzzy now, but I remember thinking we missed something important there." Kimberly returned, noticing her father's agitation. "I think that's enough for today," she said firmly. As Talia gathered her notes, Reed caught her wrist with surprising strength. "The 20th anniversary," he murmured. "Things buried have a way of surfacing after so long." Walking back to her car, Talia felt a familiar tingle, the sensation that had led her to her biggest stories in Chicago. Something about Reed's mention of the caves nagged at her. It wasn't in the official reports, wasn't in any of the extensive media coverage. Driving past the town memorial, she noticed fresh flowers on the 3 stone benches and slowed her car. 20 years, and still people remembered. Still they grieved. As she watched, a sudden gust of wind scattered some of the flower petals across the green, carrying them up in a swirling dance, like 3 spirits refusing to rest until they were found. Everett Finch adjusted his headlamp and double-checked the secure knot in his climbing rope. The mouth of the unexplored cave gaped before him like a wound in the mountainside, jagged and dark. He'd been mapping the Black Ridge cave system for his graduate thesis for nearly a year, but this particular opening had only revealed itself after the heavy spring rains washed away decades of vegetation and loose soil. "Found something interesting," he murmured into his digital recorder. "Narrow entrance, approximately 2 feet wide by 4 feet tall. Shows signs of water erosion, but also..." He paused, running his gloved finger along a section of rock. Possible tool marks? Man-made widening? Perhaps? At 26, Everett had the methodical patience of someone twice his age. Unlike his fellow geology students who craved the adrenaline of rock climbing or whitewater rafting, he preferred the slow, deliberate exploration of underground spaces, cathedral-like chambers and twisting passageways that had never known human presence. Until now, apparently. He squeezed through the narrow entrance, his backpack scraping against the stone walls. The air inside was cool and damp, carrying the mineral smell he'd come to associate with the deeper cave systems. His headlamp cut through the darkness, revealing a small chamber about 15 feet in diameter. "Initial chamber shows." The words died in his throat as the beam of light fell upon something unnatural. A synthetic material, blue and weathered, pushed against the far wall. Everett approached cautiously, his heartbeat quickening. A sleeping bag. Tattered and mildewed, but unmistakably a sleeping bag. Beside it lay another, and then a third, arranged in a rough triangle. "What the hell?" he whispered, momentarily forgetting his recorder. His systematic nature took over, and he began to document what he found. Remnants of food packaging, energy bar wrappers with faded 2005 expiration dates. A plastic water jug, long empty. A small, battery-powered lantern that no longer worked. And most strikingly, a blue and gold pom-pom. Its once vibrant streamers now dull and brittle. "This isn't a typical transient camp," he noted into his recorder. "These items appear old, possibly undisturbed, for years. And there's..." He swallowed hard. "There's evidence of long-term habitation." That evidence covered one wall of the cave, hundreds of tally marks scratched into the limestone surface. Each mark was roughly the same size, grouped in sets of 5. Near the beginning, they were carefully executed, evenly spaced. Toward the end, they became erratic, desperate. Everett counted. 417 marks. 417 days. His light caught something else. An arrow scratched into the stone, pointing toward a narrow passage at the back of the chamber. Unlike the main entrance, This opening showed clear signs of attempted widening, scratch marks from improvised, tools, chunks of limestone broken away from the edges. The passage was too small for him to enter without proper equipment, but he could see it continued deeper into the mountain. Turning back to the main chamber, Everett noticed one final detail: a small pile of rocks in the center, arranged with obvious purpose. Upon closer inspection, he realized it wasn't random, but a crude arrow pointing toward the rear passage. Hearts pounding, he carefully photographed everything with his camera, capturing the sleeping bags, the food wrappers, the tally marks, and the pom-pom. Whatever happened here, it was clear no one had found this place before him. No police tape, no evidence markers. This was undisturbed. As he prepared to exit the cave, his boot nudged something partially buried in the dirt floor. Kneeling, he carefully brushed away the soil to reveal a plastic container, the kind used for leftovers, its lid sealed with what looked like melted candle wax. Everett stared at it, wrestling with his scientific instincts to document everything, and a growing certainty that he had stumbled into something beyond academic interest. This wasn't just a cave. It was a time capsule. Perhaps a crime scene. By the time he emerged from the cave, the afternoon sun was low on the horizon. The town of Pinecrest spread out below him, its buildings tiny from this elevation. Once back, in cell range, he didn't call his academic advisor as protocol demanded. Instead, he dialed the Pinecrest Sheriff's Department. "I need to speak with someone about a discovery on Black Ridge Mountain," he said when the dispatcher answered. I think I might have found something related to those missing girls." Sheriff Martina Lopez was waiting for him when he arrived at the station 30 minutes later, her expression guarded but her eyes alert with interest. As Everett described his discovery, her professional composure gave way to visible shock. "You're absolutely certain this hasn't been disturbed?" she asked, studying his photographs. "In 20 years, no one found this." The entrance was completely overgrown until the recent landslide, Everett explained, and it's miles from where any search would have focused. Lopez stared at the image of the blue and gold pom-pom, then reached for her phone. "I need to call someone from the Gazette," she said, "and keep this quiet until we investigate properly." But as Everett would soon learn, in Pinecrest, secrets rarely stayed buried for long. By midnight, Talia's phone buzzed with a text from Sheriff Lopez. "My office. 7 a.m. Something found." By dawn, her editor Martin was already fielding calls from 3 different people claiming to have exclusive information about a discovery on Black Ridge Mountain. "Small towns," Talia muttered, hurrying into the sheriff's office at 6:58 a.m., coffee in hand. She found Lopez and a lanky young man with dirt still under his fingernails hunched over a laptop. "Talia Reed, meet Everett Finch," Lopez said. "He's a geology grad student who just changed everything we thought we knew about the Pumas case." Over the next hour, Everett walked them through his discovery, his methodical nature evident in the precise documentation of everything he'd found. Talia's journalistic instincts fired on all cylinders as she took notes, asking clarifying questions about distances, visibility of the cave entrance, and the apparent age of the items. "I need to break this story," she said finally, looking at Lopez. The sheriff nodded reluctantly. "On one condition. You wait until I've notified the families. They deserve to hear it from me, not read it in tomorrow's paper." Talia agreed, though her fingers itched to start typing. This wasn't just the biggest story in Pinecrest. It could resurrect her career. But as she watched Lopez gather her keys and badge, preparing to deliver news that would shatter the fragile peace 3 families had constructed over 2 decades, the human cost sobered her. "I'd like to interview them," she said. "Not today, but when they're ready." "I'll ask," Lopez promised. "In the meantime, work with Everett. We're assembling a forensics team, but they won't arrive until tomorrow. You two know more than anyone else right now." Isaac Holloway's hands trembled so violently that he couldn't lift the glass of whiskey to his lips. Sheriff Lopez had just left, and the silence in his small, cluttered house pressed in from all sides. 20 years of drinking hadn't dulled the pain. It had merely preserved it, like an insect in amber, perfect and poisonous. They'd found evidence of Wren, his Wren, in a cave. He fumbled for his phone, scrolling to a number he hadn't called in. "Years, Carmen?" he rasped when a woman answered. "They found something about the girls." Across town, Carmen Diaz sat surrounded by her family, just as she had 20 years ago. Now her other children were adults with children of their own, but they had come running at her call. Her youngest daughter, Lucia, only 6 when Marisol disappeared, sat closest to her, holding her hand. "What does it mean, Mama?" Lucia asked, softly. At 26, she was now the age Marisol would never reach. She had grown up in the shadow of her sister's absence, her entire life defined by being the missing girl's little sister. "It means we might finally know," Carmen replied, eyes fixed on the crucifix on the wall. She had prayed every day for 20 years, first for Marisol's return, then for answers, and finally, just for peace. The Chens proved hardest to notify. After leaving Pinecrest, they had moved through a series of cities before settling in Philadelphia. The father had passed 5 years ago, but Lopez managed to reach Mrs. Chen through the community center where she now taught Mandarin classes. The call lasted only 3 minutes, ending with Mrs. Chen's soft declaration, "I will come. I need to see." By afternoon, the news had spread through Pinecrest like wildfire. Talia and Everett sat in a booth at Molly's diner, comparing notes and ignoring the obvious stares from locals who had already connected them to the rumors. "It doesn't make sense," Everett said, sketching the cave layout on a napkin. "Why would 3 teenage girls hide in a cave miles from town? And those tally marks, over a year's worth. And the passage they tried to widen," Talia added. "Where does it lead?" "That's what I want to find out," Everett replied. "But Lopez sealed the cave until the forensics team arrives." Their conversation halted as the diner's door opened and a woman in her mid-20s entered. Her dark eyes scanned the room before settling on their table. Without invitation, she slid into the booth beside Talia. "You're the reporter," she stated, "and you found the cave." "We're not giving interviews yet," Talia began, but the woman cut her off. "I'm Lucia Diaz. Marisol was my sister." The resemblance was suddenly obvious. The same high cheekbones and determined set of the jaw Talia had seen in old photographs. Lucia had grown up in the vacuum left by her sister's disappearance, her identity forever linked to tragedy. "My mother told me what you found," Lucia continued. "The sleeping bags, the tally marks, the pom-pom." Everett shifted uncomfortably. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have—" "No," Lucia interrupted. "You don't understand. I'm grateful. For 20 years, I've lived with missing. Do you know what that word does to a family? It's not like dead, where you can grieve and eventually move forward. Missing keeps you frozen in time, always waiting, always wondering." Her voice caught, and she took a moment to compose herself. "Marisol used to practice cheers with me in our backyard. She promised to teach me all her stunts when I was older." Lucia's eyes glistened. "I need to know what happened to her. Whatever it is, even if it's the worst, it's better than missing." As she spoke, the diner grew quiet, other patrons pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. "I'll help however I can," Talia promised, reaching for her notebook. "Tell me about your sister. Tell me about all of them." Later that evening, as forensics experts began arriving in Pinecrest and news vans from regional stations parked along Main Street, 3 families prepared to face the truth they had both craved and dreaded for 2 decades. The sealed container from the cave sat in an evidence locker at the sheriff's station, its contents still unknown. Whatever secrets it held would soon come to light, for better or worse. The forensics team worked through the night, meticulously documenting and collecting evidence from the cave. By morning, they had transported everything to the Pinecrest Sheriff's Department, converting a conference room into a makeshift lab. The plastic container sat at the center of the table, now cleaned of dirt and photographed from every angle. Sheriff Lopez had assembled a small group in the room. Herself, the lead forensic technician, Talia as the press representative, and former Sheriff Reed, who had insisted on being present despite his daughter's concerns. His hands shook slightly, but his eyes were clear today. One of his good days. "The seal appears to be candle wax," the technician explained, carefully working around the edges with a thin blade. "Homemade, but effective. The contents have been protected from moisture and insects." When the lid finally lifted, the room fell silent. Inside lay 3 spiral notebooks, each with a name written on the cover in careful teenage handwriting. Ren, Zara, and Marisol. "Diaries," Lopez whispered, reaching for latex gloves before touching anything. Over the next several hours, the group read through the notebooks, piecing together a story none of them had expected. The technician scanned each page before passing it on, creating digital copies while preserving the originals. Talia's journalistic detachment crumbled as she read Ren's first entry, dated May 15, 2005, the day after the disappearance. "I still can't believe we're doing this. Zara keeps saying we should go back, but Marisol and I convinced her to stick to the plan. We have food for 2 weeks if we're careful. By then, Ms. Templeton will have been exposed, and we can come home knowing everyone will believe us." Reed's hand trembled as he set down a page from Zara's diary. "They ran away," he said, disbelief evident in his voice. "All these years, we thought." "But why?" Lopez asked, reaching for the next page. Marisol's entry from May 17th provided the answer. "We found the photos yesterday. Coach was going through our bags during practice. We thought she was checking for gum, but Zara caught her photographing our personal journals, the ones where we wrote about boys and parties and stuff our parents would freak about. She's been blackmailing the older girls for years. Do what she says, or she sends the photos to your parents, your church, your college scouts. Jenna quit the team because of it last year. Everyone thought she was just being dramatic." Ren's entry from May 20th expanded. "We tried to tell Principal Edwards, but he said we needed proof. Coach is his wife's best friend. He thinks we're making it up because she's tough on us. So we decided to get proof ourselves. We accidentally left Marisol's journal where Coach would find it. Inside was a fake entry about us sneaking out to the cave. We knew she'd come looking for us. She can't help herself. She's obsessed with controlling everyone. We have the camera ready. Once we have photos of her going through our stuff, we can prove everything." The plan had gone terribly wrong. Subsequent entries revealed that Ms. Templeton never came to the cave. Meanwhile, the massive search effort focused on areas closer to town, never extending to the remote cave system miles away on Black Ridge Mountain. Zara's increasingly desperate entries detailed their dwindling supplies. Day 12. We're almost out of food. The berries we gathered made Wren sick. We need to go home. Proof or no proof? Yet they hadn't gone home. Marisol's entry on May 28th explained why. Something crashed near the cave entrance tonight. We thought it was a search party finally finding us, but it was Jared, the creepy janitor from school. He had Zara's missing ribbon. He said he's been watching us for months, following us. He knows we're hiding from Coach and says he wants to help. But the way he looked at us. We barricaded ourselves in the back chamber. He's too big to fit through the narrow part. We're safe for now. But we're trapped. Talia felt sick as the story unfolded across the pages. The girls had become prisoners in their own hideout, rationing their meager supplies, while Jared Blackwood, the maintenance worker from the school, made daily visits, sometimes bringing small amounts of food, sometimes just watching them, talking to them. Reed suddenly pushed back from the table. "Blackwood," he muttered. "I remember him. Questioned him once because he'd been working late the night of the competition. He quit right after the disappearance. We tried to find him for follow-up, but he'd left town. Did you ever locate him?" Talia asked. "No," Reed admitted. "His trail went cold in Tennessee." The final entries were shorter, more frantic. The girls had been trying to widen the passage at the back of the cave, believing it might lead to another exit. Wren's last entry from September 2005, nearly 4 months after their disappearance, was just 3 lines. "We're getting out. Tonight. I heard water beyond the passage. There must be another way out. If anyone finds this, tell our families we love them." And then, nothing. The pages that followed remained blank, leaving their fate uncertain. The room fell silent as Lopez closed the last notebook. "We need to widen that rear passage," she said finally. "Whatever happened to them, the Reed's answer lies deeper in that cave." Reed stared at the diaries, tears in his eyes. "All these years," he whispered. "They weren't taken. They hid. And then they were trapped." Talia looked at her notes, struggling to process what they'd discovered. The cheerleaders had vanished by choice, only to become victims after all. But victims of what? Or whom? And how? Had their story ended? The truth, she suspected, would be worse than any of them imagined. Eleanor Templeton's cottage sat at the end of Willow Lane, its garden meticulously maintained despite the owner's advancing age. At 64, she still moved with the precision of someone who had spent decades training young bodies into perfect formations. Her silver hair was pulled into the same tight bun she'd worn throughout her 30-year coaching career. The knock at her door came as she was watering her orchids, a post-retirement hobby that demanded the same attention to detail as choreographing routines. Talia stood on the porch, notebook in hand, heart pounding with equal parts journalistic eagerness and moral outrage. "Ms. Templeton, I'm Talia Reed from the Gazette. I was hoping to talk to you about Wren, Zara, and Marisol." The older woman's face remained impassive, but her hand tightened visibly around the doorframe. "The 20th anniversary," she said flatly. "I've already declined comment to the other reporters." "This isn't about the anniversary," Talia replied. "It's about what we found in the cave on Black Ridge Mountain." The color drained from Templeton's face. Without a word, she stepped aside, allowing Talia to enter. The interior of the cottage was as pristine as its garden, with one striking anomaly. An entire wall covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, and maps connected by red string. An EPE investigation board worthy of a detective film. "You've been looking for them," Talia said, surprised. "Every day for 20 years." Templeton gestured to a chair. "What exactly did you find?" Talia made a calculated decision. Their diaries. The former coach didn't flinch or protest her innocence as expected. Instead, she walked to a small cabinet, removed a leather-bound book, and handed it to Talia. "My own diary," she explained. "I started it the day they disappeared. I assume theirs mentioned my inappropriateness." "Blackmail," Talia corrected, opening the book. "They said you photographed their personal journals and used the information to control the team." Templeton sat heavily, suddenly looking every one of her 64 years. "I was wrong," she admitted, her voice steady despite the confession. "Deeply, unforgivably wrong. I convinced myself I was protecting them, keeping their secrets from parents who wouldn't understand, from college recruiters who would judge teenage indiscretions harshly." She gestured to the wall of evidence. "But that's not why I've spent 2 decades searching for them." Talia followed her gaze to the center of the board, where a driver's license photo of a man with close-cropped brown hair and a maintenance uniform had been circled repeatedly in red marker. "Jared Blackwood," Templeton said, almost whispering. "The name? I caught him in the locker room once, before the girls disappeared. Said he was fixing a leak, but there was no work order. I reported him to the administration, but nothing came of it. After the girls vanished, I remembered the way he used to watch practice from the hallway. How he always volunteered to set up for competitions." She stood, moving to the wall and tapping a newspaper clipping. "He left town 3 days after they disappeared. New job in Kentucky, then Tennessee. I tracked him to Missouri in 2007, then lost him." Her finger slid to a more recent article. "Until this." Talia leaned closer to read the headline. "Former school employee dies in single car accident." 2 years ago," Templeton continued. "I drove to Oak Ridge to confirm it was him. It was. Died alone. No family at the funeral. You think he had something to do with their disappearance? I know he did." Templeton's certainty was chilling. "The girls wrote about him in their diaries?" Talia nodded, watching the older woman carefully. "They said he found them in the cave, brought them food sometimes, but also trapped them there." Templeton closed her eyes briefly. "I've imagined 1,000 scenarios over the years. That was one of the worst." "Why didn't you tell the police about your suspicions?" "I did. Reed interviewed me 5 times. I told him about Blackwood each time." Bitterness crept into her voice. "But they were focused on me, the tough coach who pushed them too hard. They searched my house, my car, questioned my neighbors. By the time they started looking elsewhere, Blackwood was long gone." Talia gestured to the wall. "And you've been conducting your own investigation ever since. What choice did I have? 3 girls disappeared after planning to report me. Whether Blackwood took them or not, I set everything in motion." Templeton's composure finally cracked. "I couldn't save my career or reputation. The least I could do was try to find them." The admission hung in the air between them. Not a declaration of innocence, but a complex acknowledgement of culpability alongside 20 years of penance. Talia studied her notes, reconciling the monster described in the diaries with the broken, determined woman before her. The sheriff is organizing an excavation of the rear passage in the cave. The girls mentioned trying to escape that way. Hope and dread crossed Templeton's face in equal measure. "When?" "Tomorrow morning. They're bringing in equipment and spelunking experts. I need to be there." It wasn't a request. As Talia prepared to leave, Templeton handed her a thick folder from the investigation board. "Everything I've gathered on Blackwood. It might help." Standing on the porch, Talia turned back with one final question. Do you think they made it? Out? Through that passage? Templeton stared past her, toward Black Ridge Mountain visible in the distance. For 20 years, I've prayed they did. Her voice dropped to a whisper. But I've never quite managed to believe it. Dawn broke over Black Ridge Mountain, painting the limestone cliffs in amber light. A caravan of vehicles wound up the narrow access road, Sheriff Lopez's cruiser, Everett's mud-spattered Jeep, a forensics van, and 2 trucks carrying equipment and cave rescue specialists from the State Emergency Response Team. Talia rode with Everett, her notebook already filled with observations. In the back seat sat Lucia Diaz, who had insisted on being present, and Eleanor Templeton, whose extensive knowledge of the case had reluctantly earned her a place on the expedition. "How narrow is the passage?" asked Greg Winters, the lead cave specialist, as they gathered at the entrance. Everett consulted his notes. About 14 inches at its widest point. Evidence suggests the girls tried to widen it with improvised tools, but the limestone is dense here. "We've brought micro-charges," Winters explained, "controlled, directional. They'll widen the passage without risking a collapse of the main chamber." Sheriff Lopez addressed the group. "Our priority is determining if there are human remains beyond that passage. Everything gets documented exactly as found. No one touches anything without forensics present." They entered the cave in a somber procession. Despite having read about it, seeing the tally marks on the wall and the remains of the girls' makeshift camp hit Talia with unexpected emotional force. Lucia gasped softly beside her, reaching out to touch the stone where her sister had marked the days of her captivity. Templeton stood apart from the others, her face ashen as she surveyed what her actions had indirectly created. The specialists worked methodically, placing small charges at strategic points along the narrow passage. Everyone retreated to the cave entrance during the controlled explosions, which sent fine limestone dust drifting through the air. After the third blast, Winters shone his high-powered light into the widened passage. "We've got enough clearance," he announced. "Harnesses required from this point. The passage slopes downward about 15 degrees and narrows again 20 feet. In!" Everett was the first to enter, his slender frame ideal for the confined space. Talia followed, surprised to find herself volunteering despite the claustrophobic darkness. As a journalist, she needed to see firsthand what they discovered. Winters came next, then 2 forensics technicians. The others would wait for their assessment. The passage wound like a corkscrew, descending deeper into the mountain. Their headlamps cast eerie shadows on the limestone walls, which showed clear scratch marks, evidence of the girls' desperate attempts to widen the natural formation. About 30 feet in, Everett stopped abruptly. "There's something here," he said, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. Talia squinted past him. In a small alcove along the passage wall lay a delicate silver bracelet with a butterfly charm. "That's Zara's," Templeton called from further back, her voice tight with emotion. "Her grandmother gave it to her when they left China. She never took it off." The forensics technician carefully photographed and collected the bracelet. As they continued, more items appeared. A blue hair clip embedded in calcified sediment, a torn piece of fabric that might once have been part of a Puma's uniform. 50 feet in, the passage widened into a small chamber with 3 possible continuations. They would have reached this point and had to choose a direction, Everett said, examining the formations. The middle passage shows the most evidence of attempted widening. As they moved toward it, Talia's light caught something dark smeared along the wall's edge. The lead forensics technician hurried forward, swabbing the substance. "Appears to be blood," she confirmed, carefully collecting samples. "Significantly degraded, but preserved by the cave environment." Winters examined the area with his more powerful light. "There was a collapse here," he said, pointing to freshly broken stone compared to the older surfaces. "Looks like someone tried to force their way through and triggered a small cave-in." The implications hung heavy in the still air. The team pressed on through the middle passage, which narrowed again before abruptly ending in a wall of collapsed rock. "We can't safely clear this without risking further collapse," Winters declared after assessment. "The entire section is unstable." "So we can't go further?" Talia asked. "Not this way," Everett replied, studying his compass. "But these other passages might connect to different systems. The hydrology suggests there's a water source beyond this blockage." Back at the mouth of the cave, Lopez received a call from her deputy. "We've got results on Blackwood," she announced to the group. He worked at Pinecrest High for 3 years before the disappearance. Prior to that, he was fired from 2 other school districts for inappropriate conduct, though charges were never filed. She paused, reviewing the information. He left town May 17, 2005, 3 days after the girls disappeared. New maintenance job in Kentucky, then moved to Tennessee, Missouri, finally settling in Oak Ridge. Died 2 years ago in a single vehicle accident. "Suicide?" Talia asked, thinking of Templeton's file. "Inconclusive," Lopez replied. "Blood alcohol level was elevated." As they digested this information, a forensics technician approached with preliminary findings. "The blood on the cave wall is human, and we have a match to one of the DNA samples on file. It belongs to Wren Holloway." A heavy silence fell over the group. Somewhere in the forest above, a bird called to its mate, the sound filtering into the cave entrance, life continuing, oblivious to the tragedy unfolding below. "What about the other passages?" Lucia asked, her voice breaking the silence. "If they couldn't go through the middle one, maybe they tried another way." Everett nodded thoughtfully. The left passage seemed to slope upward. It might eventually reach the surface on the other side of the ridge. "How far would that be?" Lopez asked. "Miles," Everett admitted, "and we'd need specialized equipment to explore it safely." As the day's light began to fade, Talia watched the mountain's shadow creep across the valley below, where Pinecrest's lights were beginning to twinkle on. The truth they sought seemed to be slipping further away, obscured by rock and time and death. 3 days later, Pinecrest buzzed with renewed activity. Heavy equipment rumbled up Black Ridge Mountain as county workers arrived to assist with a major excavation. The initial exploration had hit a dead end, but hope resurfaced when Everett presented his detailed analysis of the cave system to Sheriff Lopez. "The left passage is our best bet," he explained, pointing to his meticulously drawn maps spread across the conference table. "It slopes upward consistently and follows the natural fault line in the mountain. If the girls were looking for a way out, this would be the logical choice after the middle passage collapsed. But we don't have evidence they went that way," Lopez countered. "Actually, we might," Talia interjected, flipping through her notes. "I reread the diaries. Wren wrote that she heard water beyond the passage. The middle passage leads deeper, into the mountain, not toward any water source." Everett nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. But the left passage could intersect with Crystal Creek on the eastern slope. That's what they might have heard." The excavation began at dawn, focusing on widening the left passage sufficiently for full exploration. By afternoon, a team had progressed nearly 200 feet, confirming Everett's theory as the passage gradually angled upward and eastward. Meanwhile, Talia delved into the historical records of the original search. Former search party members recounted their efforts, describing how they had focused primarily on areas within a 5-mile radius of the competition venue. "The dogs kept trying to head up toward Black Ridge," recalled Terry Simmons, who had volunteered with his bloodhound. But the coordinator called us back, said it was too far. No way 3 girls in cheer uniforms could have made it that far on. Foot? Why didn't anyone listen to the dogs? Talia asked. Terry shrugged. Storm came through the night after they disappeared, washed away most scents. Dogs were getting confused signals. And honestly, nobody thought to look miles up a mountain. We were searching for kidnap victims, not cavers. Reviewing meteorological data confirmed his account. A significant storm had hit the region on May 15, 2005, dropping 3 inches of rain in 24 hours. Any tracks leading toward the mountain would have been obliterated. On the 4th day of excavation, Talia's phone buzzed with a text from Everett. Breakthrough! Come now! She arrived at the cave to find an atmosphere of tense excitement. The excavation team had broken through to a larger passage that showed clear signs of water erosion. They had reached a section connected to the underground watershed. We think this eventually opens near Crystal Creek, Everett explained as they donned helmets and followed the now widened passage. And we found something else. 200 yards in, the passage opened into a cathedral-like chamber with a small underground stream trickling along one wall. Near a narrow crevice that appeared to lead outward, a forensics technician was photographing an object half buried in sediment. A weathered backpack. We've just started processing it, Lopez said, approaching them. But the initial examination shows it contains identification belonging to Jared Blackwood. Talia's pulse quickened. He followed them. That's not all, Lopez continued, gesturing to other items laid out on a tarp. A disposable camera with the film still inside, a half-eaten energy bar in its original 2005 wrapper, and what appeared to be torn pieces of blue and gold fabric. Things that could only have come from the girls, Talia whispered. As they continued through the newly accessible section, the passage gradually widened and sloped more steeply upward. Everett consulted his instruments regularly, tracking their progress. We're definitely heading toward the eastern slope, he confirmed. If the girls made it this far, they were on the right track. This passage eventually connects to a series of smaller caves that open about 2 miles from the main entrance on the other side of the ridge. By evening, the team had reached a critical juncture, a narrow vertical shaft that rose toward the surface, with crude footholds carved into the rock. Someone climbed up here, the lead technician noted, illuminating the shaft with powerful lights. These aren't natural formations. They made it this far, Talia said, hope rising in her chest. They found a way out. The next day, a specialized climbing team ascended the shaft, confirming it led to a small opening on the eastern slope of Black Ridge Mountain. The exit was partially hidden by vegetation, but once cleared, revealed a clear path down toward Crystal Creek. Back in town, Talia shared the findings with the families and Ms. Templeton at the sheriff's office. So they escaped the cave, Isaac Holloway said, his voice hollow with 20 years of grief. But then what? Why didn't they come home? Lopez spread a map on the table. The exit point is here, she said, marking it with a pin. It's approximately 7 miles from the nearest road, through difficult terrain. And remember, Wren was injured. We found her blood in the cave. Could they have been trying to reach help? Lucia asked. That's what we believe, Lopez confirmed. But they would have been weakened from months in the cave, with limited supplies, possibly dealing with an injury, and completely disoriented about their location. As they digested this information, a deputy entered with a report from the crime lab. They've processed the disposable camera film, he announced. It's degraded, but they recovered 12 images. The photographs, grainy and water-damaged, told a chilling story. The first several showed the cave interior, the girls documenting their hideout. Then came shots of the passages, apparently taken during their escape attempt. The final 3 images made everyone in the room fall silent. They showed Jared Blackwood following them through the cave, his expression visible by camera flash. Not angry or menacing as they might have expected, but desperate, almost pleading. The last photo was blurred, as if taken during a struggle, capturing falling rocks as part of the passage collapsed. "He caused the cave-in," Everett said softly, "probably accidentally, during a confrontation. And then went after them through the other passage," Talia added, the pieces finally fitting together. Lopez stood, determination etched on her face. "We need search teams on the eastern slope. Now that we know where they exited and the direction they likely headed, we can finally conduct a proper search." As the meeting ended, Talia realized that for the first time in 20 years, the town of Pinecrest had more than just questions. They had a trail to follow. The eastern slope of Black Ridge Mountain had remained largely unexplored in the decades since the girls' disappearance. Unlike the western side facing Pinecrest, with its hiking trails and picnic areas, the eastern slope was rugged wilderness, steep ravines, dense pine forest, and the swift waters of Crystal Creek cutting through. Ancient rock. Dawn broke over this untamed landscape as the largest search party in Pinecrest history assembled at the cave exit. Volunteers came from surrounding counties, many of whom had participated in the original search 20 years earlier. Search and rescue teams with cadaver dogs moved methodically through predetermined grids. This time, they wouldn't be called. Back, Talia hiked alongside Everett, who had been asked to consult based on his knowledge of the terrain. Lucia Diaz walked determinedly behind them, refusing to be left behind on what might be the final search for her sister. Even Eleanor Templeton had been permitted to join, though she kept to herself, her face a mask of grim purpose. "If they made it this far," Everett said, pausing to examine their topographical map, "they would likely have followed the creek. It's the logical path down the mountain, and they would have needed water." The group radioed this insight to Sheriff Lopez, who redirected several teams to focus on the creek's winding path. By mid-morning, the summer heat beat down mercilessly, making the search even more challenging. The dense canopy of pine trees provided intermittent shade, but also limited visibility to just a few yards in some areas. "Wait," called a searcher ahead of them. "I've got something." The team gathered around a weathered piece of fabric snagged on a bramble, faded blue with traces of what might once have been gold thread. "It matches the Puma's uniform," confirmed the forensic technician who carefully collected it. "The degradation is consistent with 20 years of exposure." Hope and dread mingled as they pushed forward with renewed purpose. The creek led them through a series of small ravines, each more difficult to navigate than the last. 3 hours in, one of the cadaver dogs alerted, pulling its handler toward a steep embankment. At the bottom lay the partial remains of a backpack, its contents scattered by decades of weather and wildlife. A water bottle, a corroded flashlight, and most significantly, a laminated competition schedule from May 14, 2005, with Pumas circled in blue ink. They were following the creek, Lopez said, marking the location on her map. Just as Everett predicted. As the day wore on, more evidence emerged, a shoe similar to the girls' cheer sneakers, though too degraded for definitive identification. A hair elastic with a few strands of dark hair still attached, and most tellingly, 3 sets of footprints, preserved in a patch of hardened mud near the creek bank, protected from the elements by an overhanging rock. The stride length indicates they were moving slowly, noted the forensic technician examining the prints. And this set here, she pointed to the middle prints, shows an uneven gait, consistent with an injury. Wren, Talia whispered, remembering the blood found in the cave. Everett studied his map again, calculating distances. From here, it's still about 5 miles to the nearest access road. If they were injured and unfamiliar with the terrain, he didn't need to finish. Everyone understood the implication. Even having escaped the cave, the girls faced a grueling journey through wilderness, weakened from months of captivity, with at least one of them injured. The search continued for 3 more days, gradually moving downstream. On the afternoon of the 4th day, as storm clouds gathered ominously overhead, a call came through on the radio that brought the entire operation to a standstill. "We found something. Coordinates 35.742, 82.189. All team leaders report." The location was a small clearing about a quarter-mile from the creek, nestled in a protective hollow surrounded by ancient pine trees. As Talia arrived with her group, she saw Sheriff Lopez standing motionless before what appeared to be a carefully constructed stone formation. Not natural, but deliberately built. It was a shelter, created by stacking rocks to form low walls against a natural stone outcropping, with fallen logs positioned to create a crude roof. Though weather had damaged parts of the structure, its purpose was unmistakable. A final refuge. "They built this," Lopez said softly as the search team gathered. "They made it this far and built a shelter. Inside the stone enclosure, protected from decades of elements, lay the final chapter of the girl's story. 3 sets of human remains, positioned close together as if in an eternal embrace. Remnants of a makeshift camp surrounded them, crude tools fashioned from branches, a fire pit long cold, and, surprisingly, a smooth stone with markings etched into its surface. As forensics technicians began their grim work, documenting and collecting the remains with solemn respect, Talia moved closer to examine the stone. The markings were deliberate, scratched with what must have been painstaking effort. "We chose freedom. Remember us." Tears blurred her vision as the significance of those words sank in. Even at the end, the girls had maintained their independence, their solidarity with each other. They hadn't died captives in a cave, but free under an open sky, together until the last. Initial examination suggested they had survived for several weeks after escaping the cave. The remains showed evidence of healing in Wren's fractured arm, indicating she lived long enough for the bone to begin mending. Exposure and their weakened condition had likely been the ultimate cause of death, though conclusive determination would require laboratory analysis. Most haunting was the positioning of the bodies. Zara in the middle, with Wren and Marisol on either side, their arms around her. Forensics suggested Zara had died first, the other 2 keeping her between them as if to protect her even in death. When their time came, they had remained exactly as they had lived, inseparable. No evidence of Jared Blackwood was found near the shelter, though his remains were discovered 2 days later, nearly a mile upstream. He had apparently pursued them, but died from a compound fracture to his leg, the injury likely sustained during the cave-in he had caused. Unlike the girls, he had died alone. As news spread through Pinecrest, the town experienced a complex wave of emotions. Grief renewed, yet somehow gentled by knowing, relief that the mystery was solved, and a collective process of finally being able to mourn properly after 20 years of uncertainty. On a warm June evening, exactly 20 years and 1 month after the disappearance, Pinecrest gathered for a different kind of ceremony. Rather than the somber candlelight vigil of previous anniversaries, this was a proper memorial service held at the site where the girls had made their last stand. The forest hollow had been carefully cleared to accommodate the crowd, though the stone shelter remained untouched, a monument to 3 young women who had faced the unimaginable with courage and unity. Isaac Holloway stood straighter than he had in years, sober for the first time in decades. Carmen Diaz and her family formed a protective circle around Lucia, who had written a poem to honor the sister she barely remembered. Mrs. Chen had traveled from Philadelphia, bringing incense and paper offerings in the tradition of her homeland. Even Falfandu, Eleanor Templeton, was present, standing apart from the crowd but included in the collective acknowledgement that the past could not be changed, only accepted. Her investigation board had been donated to the Town Historical Society, a thorough, if painful, documentation of the case. Sheriff Lopez conducted the service with quiet dignity, reading the inscription from the stone found with the girls. "We chose freedom. Remember us." Former Sheriff Reed, having one of his clearest days in months, placed his badge on the memorial as a final tribute to the case that had defined his career. As the ceremony concluded, Talia stood with Everett at the edge of the clearing, watching families begin the long healing process, the true closure finally allowed. "I keep thinking about those shoes," Everett said quietly, "perfectly lined up at the edge of the forest." "Their own choice," Talia replied, understanding now. Their first act of freedom, stepping out of the lives they knew and into uncertainty, rather than endure what was happening. They chose their own path. In the gentle June breeze, the pines whispered overhead, guardians of a secret finally told. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, 3 butterflies, one blue, one gold, one iridescent white, fluttered briefly around the stone shelter before rising together toward the fading light. Talia wasn't a superstitious person, but watching them disappear into the evening sky, she couldn't help but feel that something in the universe had finally been set right. 3 friends who had lived together, fought together, and died together were at last being remembered together. Not as victims, but as brave young women who had faced darkness with remarkable courage. And somewhere deep in the forest, beside the stone shelter that had been their final home, a small memorial plaque now bore witness to their story, with words chosen by the 3 families together. Ren Holloway, Zara Chen, Marisol Diaz, 2005. They chose freedom. We choose to remember. That was the end of this story. I hope it touched your heart and kept you engaged throughout. Where are you listening from? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this emotional journey, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more such interesting stories. Don't forget to share with your friends and family to spread kindness and awareness. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful content that connects us all through shared human experiences. Until next time, thank you for listening.